You did everything right. You showed up, you paid the bills, you raised the kids, you climbed whatever ladder you were told to climb, and somehow you feel like your life passed on autopilot, like you were never actually behind the wheel of it. You know the feeling. You're driving home and you don't remember the last 10 minutes of road. You look at an old photo of your kids and can't place where you were standing when you took it. You finally get a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind you used to dream about, and instead of peace, you feel a strange panic, like you skipped your own life just to arrive here. There was a man who ran an empire, buried several of his own children, and spent over a decade fighting wars on a frozen frontier, and still found himself writing, alone, at night, just trying to remember how to be present in his own days. Marcus Aurelius knew exactly what this feels like. So here's what I want to show you: why this happens, why it gets worse right around your 40s and 50s once the noise dies down, and exactly what to do about it to get back in the driver's seat. It starts with understanding what living on reflex actually does to a mind, because that's the engine running underneath everything you call autopilot. Your mind doesn't actually react to what happens to you. It reacts to the story it tells itself about what happens to you, and it writes that story in a fraction of a second, faster than you can ever notice. There's a gap there, a tiny one, between the thing that happens and the way you respond to it. In that gap is where a decision could live. But most of us spent decades training ourselves to skip that gap entirely, on purpose, because for a long time skipping it was the only way to keep up. Think about how you actually survived your 20s and 30s. Someone needed something from you right now. The deadline was today. The kid was crying and needed a bottle 3 minutes ago. The boss wanted the report before lunch. There was no time to pause and ask, do I actually want to respond this way? You just had to move, again and again, thousands of times, across work, across parenting, across your marriage, across every ordinary errand of a normal week. And the body learns exactly what you train it to learn. After enough years of moving before thinking, it stops waiting for permission. It just discharges. It runs the program. That program is what we call autopilot, and it isn't a character flaw, it's a skill you built on purpose, because for a long time it kept you and the people who depend on you safe. Marcus Aurelius wasn't a philosopher sitting quietly in some garden, untouched by real life. He was a working emperor managing wars, plagues, betrayals, and a massive empire that never stopped demanding something from him. At night alone, he wrote private notes to himself, what we now call the Meditations. He never intended for anyone else to read them. He wasn't writing a book of wisdom for the ages. He was writing reminders to catch himself before he reacted like a machine, in the middle of an actual life that was just as relentless as yours. He understood that a mind left untrained will always take the fastest road available, and the fastest road is rarely the one you'd actually choose if you stopped, even for a second, to look at the map. You can see the same pattern in the smallest places, not just the dramatic ones. The way you answer, "How are you?" without listening to your own answer. The way you drive the same route home you've driven for 15 years and arrive without remembering a single intersection. The way you scroll through your phone in the exact same order every single time, not because you're curious, but because your thumb already knows the choreography. None of that is conscious. None of it passed through the gap. It's all just the program running. And here's the part that surprises people most. The reflex doesn't switch off on vacation either, or on a weekend, or even in bed at night. You can be lying perfectly still in the dark, no deadline anywhere near you, and still be running the program, replaying a conversation from work, drafting a reply to a text you haven't even received yet, rehearsing an argument that hasn't happened. The body learned to treat stillness itself as a kind of threat, because stillness used to mean something was about to go wrong, and you weren't ready for it. So even rest gets hijacked by the same machinery that was built to survive a crisis. You can take the family on the trip you saved 3 years for, sit on the beach you pictured 100 times, and still spend half the week mentally answering emails that aren't even open on your phone. I've done this exact thing on a Saturday morning, sitting across from my own kid, who's asking me a real question, looking right at me, waiting. And some part of me answers, sure, while the rest of me is already 3 tasks ahead, mentally rehearsing a conversation that hasn't even happened yet. The kid isn't fooled. Kids never are. They can tell the difference between a parent who's there and a parent whose body showed up without the rest of him, even if they don't have the words for it yet. Here's where it gets personal. Think about the last real fight you had with someone you love. Was it actually about what they said? Or was it your reflex running the exact same script it's run 100 times before? The one built years ago when you had no time to do anything except react. Most of the time, by the moment you actually feel the anger or the hurt, the decision already happened without you. You're just living out something your nervous system decided on your behalf a long time ago. This is the first thing Marcus would want you to see clearly. The autopilot isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. The problem is that the design was built for survival, not for a life you'd actually want to remember living, and nobody ever taught you to update the program once the emergency that built it was over. So sit with this for a second. Think back over yesterday, hour by hour. How many of those hours were you actually choosing what you did, on purpose, inside that gap? And how many were just the version of you that got trained 20 years ago to never stop moving, quietly running the show while the real you was somewhere else entirely? If the honest answer is mostly the second one, that's not a failure. That's just the program finally showing itself in daylight, which is exactly where Marcus wants you to start. This explains half the problem. The other half is more hidden, and it's the one almost nobody warns you about. You probably assume that once things settled down, once the kids needed you less and the career stopped demanding overtime, the autopilot would just switch off on its own. That presence would show up the moment there was finally room for it. This is one of the cruelest tricks of midlife because it runs exactly backwards. Marcus had a second discipline he worked on constantly, separate from the discipline of action. He called it the discipline of perception, the practice of choosing on purpose what you actually pay attention to. He understood something that feels almost unfair once you hear it out loud. The mind does not default to presence when the noise stops. It defaults to wandering. Attention is a muscle, exactly like any other. And if you spend 30 years training only the muscle that reacts to emergencies, the muscle that simply notices your own life quietly atrophies from disuse. Silence doesn't automatically bring peace. For most people, silence just exposes how out of shape that second muscle has become. I think about this every time I picture a parent finally dropping their last kid off at college. They expect relief. Instead, they drive home in a silent car and feel something closer to panic. Not because they missed the chaos, but because the chaos was the only thing telling them what to do with themselves. They sit at a red light 3 blocks from home and realize, for the first time in 18 years, nobody on earth needs them in the next 10 minutes. What makes this so disorienting is that it doesn't feel like an absence at first. It feels like restlessness, almost like boredom with a strange edge to it. You sit down to finally enjoy a free evening, and within minutes you're hunting for something to fix, organize, or worry about, because doing nothing on purpose was never part of the training. Marcus practiced the opposite skill deliberately. He would force his attention onto exactly one thing in front of him, a task, a person, a single sensation, and hold it there. Not because the thing itself was so remarkable, but because the holding was the entire point. The muscle isn't built by having something dramatic to pay attention to. It's built by practicing attention on something ordinary over and over until it stops feeling like an effort. This is why so many people hit their late 40s or 50s, finally get the quiet they spent decades wishing for, and instead of relief, they get this hollow, disoriented feeling, almost like grief without a clear cause. It isn't because something is wrong with them. It's because the part of them built to actually inhabit a quiet moment was never exercised. It was always the emergency response system doing the driving, and now the emergencies have gone quiet, leaving nothing else trained to take over the wheel. I've watched the same thing happen to a man I know who retired after 30 years at the same company. He counted down to that day for a decade. 3 weeks in, he was calling old co-workers just to ask what he'd missed. Not because he missed the work, but because the silence had nothing to hand him, and nobody had ever taught him how to hand himself something instead. I've watched it happen to people the week after they finally pay off the house, or the month after a project they obsessed over for years finally ships. The goal arrives, the urgency disappears, And instead of joy, there's this strange flatness. The only muscle doing any work this whole time was the one built for handling pressure, not the one built for simply being somewhere, on purpose, with nothing demanding anything of you. This is also exactly why the phone fills the gap so fast and so completely. It isn't that the phone is evil or that you're weak-willed. It's that the moment silence shows up and the trained muscle has nothing to offer, something has to fill that space. And a phone is the fastest, most available substitute for the urgency your nervous system has been craving its whole adult life. You're not addicted to the phone itself. You're addicted to having somewhere to point the part of you that only knows how to react. Marcus would tell you this isn't a flaw to be ashamed of. It's just information, and useful information at that. It tells you exactly where the work needs to happen. Not in finding more peace and quiet. You may already have plenty of that sitting unused right now. The work is in rebuilding the muscle that knows what to actually do with it once it shows up. Here's the question worth sitting with. When was the last time you sat completely still for 10 minutes? No phone, no list running in your head, no errand waiting, and you didn't reach for some kind of distraction within 90 seconds? If you genuinely can't remember, that's not a personality trait, and it isn't laziness. That's just the muscle Marcus is pointing at, the one nobody ever taught you to use because for 30 years, you never had a single spare minute that required it. There's a deeper layer most people never reach, and it has to do with something most of us spend an entire lifetime trying not to think about. Marcus wrote himself reminders again and again that he could leave this life at any moment, not as something morbid to dwell on, but as the single sharpest tool he had against living on autopilot. Because here's the quiet assumption hiding underneath every automatic, half-present day: tomorrow is guaranteed. Reflex only works if you believe there's an unlimited supply of days to eventually get around to the one that actually matters. The moment you genuinely remember that the supply is not unlimited, something shifts. You can't afford to sleep through the very thing Reflex was built to sleep through. He paired that practice with a second one, a different angle on the same target. He used to imagine looking down at his own life from very far away, the way you might look at a single house from an airplane window. He'd watch the size of his concerns shrink against the scale of everything else. All the centuries before him and after him. All the people who'd carried the exact same worries he was carrying that week. Two tools, same job. One used distance, the other used deadline, but both existed to make him feel exactly how much time he actually had, which was a lot less than autopilot likes to pretend. There's something almost generous about that exercise once you actually try it. Picture the thing that's eating at you this week. A deadline, an argument, a bill. Now picture it from 100 feet up, then from the height of a plane, then from somewhere out past the atmosphere, watching your whole house get smaller and smaller until it's a single point of light among millions of other points, each one holding someone going through their own version of exactly what you're going through. Most of what felt urgent a minute ago doesn't disappear from that height, but it gets sorted correctly finally, for the first time all week. You start to see which things actually deserve the hours you've been giving them, and which ones were just borrowing your attention because nothing forced you to ask the question. This is why so many people only feel truly present during a scare. A diagnosis that turns out fine. A call in the middle of the night about someone they love. For a few days afterward, everything feels sharper, more vivid, more theirs. Food tastes like something again. A child's voice sounds like an actual voice instead of background noise. And then, almost without exception, it fades, and the reflex quietly takes the wheel back. The wake-up call rarely lasts because we treat mortality like an emergency exit instead of a daily fact sitting right there in front of us the whole time. Marcus never let it fade because he refused to file it away as a one-time crisis. He treated the fact of his own ending as a daily instrument, something to pick up every morning like a tool, not something to wait for during an emergency. He didn't use it to feel afraid. He used it to ask, every single day, one very specific question. If this turns out to be one of my last days, is this really how I want to spend it on Reflex? I think about how short that window actually was for me, the last time I got a scare like that. For about a week, I noticed everything. The way my coffee actually smelled in the morning, The actual sound of my own kid's voice instead of just the noise of a request to be fed or driven somewhere. Then the crisis passed, and within 10 days I was right back to autopilot, scrolling through a meeting half listening, driving somewhere without remembering the road, treating the people in front of me like background characters in my own week. The urgency wasn't fake while it lasted. I just stopped carrying it on purpose once it was no longer being forced on me. There's a particular kind of evening that captures this perfectly, the one where everyone you love is actually in the same house. Dinner is over, nobody needs anything from you right this second. And instead of sitting with that, you find a chore that didn't really need doing tonight. Marcus would call that evening borrowed time spent paying off a debt nobody asked you to take on. The chore isn't urgent. It just feels safer than sitting still inside a moment that's already quietly one of the good ones. I know exactly which chore I reach for on those nights. Folding laundry that could wait until tomorrow, answering one more message, finding some small task to manage so I don't have to just sit in the room with the people I supposedly did all of this for. If you only had this year left, that laundry would still be sitting there unfolded. And nobody on their last evening has ever once wished they'd spent it being more productive in the next room instead of being in the room that actually mattered. So here's the question this layer hands you. If you genuinely only had this exact year left, which parts of your daily routine would you keep exactly as they are, and which ones would you cut without a second thought? Don't answer it in the abstract. Pick one specific habit from this week, something ordinary, and ask honestly whether it would survive that test, or whether it's just reflex wearing the costume of a necessary obligation. And this is the part that actually changes something, the line Marcus drew between what was happening to him and what he was doing about it. At the center of his entire practice is one distinction, simple enough to say in a single sentence and hard enough to live that it took him a lifetime of private notes to get closer to it. Some things are entirely outside your control. What happens to you, what people say, what the empire throws at you on a given week. And some things are entirely yours. Not the event itself, but the judgment you immediately attach to it and what you choose to do next. Picture the email that ruins your entire afternoon. The email itself is just text on a screen. What ruined the afternoon was the meaning you assigned to it before you'd even finished reading the second sentence. That tiny gap between the event and the story you told yourself about it, that's the seam Marcus spent his whole life trying to widen, and it's playing out right now in your inbox. He sometimes pictured the control side of that line as a kind of small fortress sitting inside him, untouched by whatever was happening outside its walls. A quiet inner room that nothing external could actually enter unless he opened the gate himself. What's easy to miss is that the fortress was never about becoming cold or detached from life. Marcus still grieved his children, still felt the cold on that frontier, still got frustrated with people who lied to him. The fortress wasn't a wall against feeling. It was a wall against being driven entirely by the first feeling that showed up, without ever checking whether that feeling was actually telling him the truth, or just repeating an old alarm that had nothing useful left to say. He actually trained for this in the mornings, before anything had gone wrong yet. He'd run through, in his head, the rude colleague, the unfair criticism, the frustrating delay he was likely to face that day, not to feel anxious about them in advance, but so that when they actually arrived, they arrived at a gate that was already expecting them, instead of one caught completely off guard. Most of us do the opposite without noticing. We walk into the day assuming it owes us a smooth ride, and then we're stunned and derailed by the first thing that doesn't cooperate, as if nobody warned us that other people might have a bad day too. You can feel the same gate, or the lack of it, in your own week. The comment from a colleague that you replay for the rest of the day, the tantrum from a tired kid that suddenly feels like a referendum on your whole parenting. I think about the slow driver in front of me on the way to work last month, the one who somehow became the reason my entire morning was ruined. I walked into a meeting 20 minutes later, still composing an argument with a stranger I'd never see again, while the actual people in the room were waiting on me to show up. None of those things had any power on their own. Marcus would say they never did. I handed that driver the keys to my whole morning, instantly, out of habit, the same habit that's been running the show since I was 30. This is also exactly why a 5-minute pause, a moment of real silence, a single deliberate question asked at the end of the day, can do something that feels disproportionate to its size. It isn't a small habit bolted onto a busy life, it's the precise location where Marcus said the entire battle actually takes place. Not out there in the empire, not out there in your inbox or your family group chat. In that seam, every day, between what happened and what you decided to do about it. Almost everything we're about to put into practice in a moment lives inside that one seam, nowhere else. So here's the question worth carrying with you. Think of one specific thing that happened to you this week where you reacted before you'd actually decided how you wanted to respond. What would have changed if you'd given yourself 3 honest seconds in that seam before reacting? Most people find the event itself wasn't even the problem. The problem was how fast they handed it the keys. Here's the real conflict. You built a version of yourself that was extraordinarily good at surviving, fast, efficient, always ready for the next emergency, and that very efficiency cost you your presence inside your own story. You weren't lazy and you weren't careless. You were so competent at handling life that you stopped noticing you were living it. Marcus never solved this with a vacation or a complete life overhaul. He solved it with one tiny, repeatable habit he returned to every single night, sitting alone, going back over the day, separating what was actually decided from what was just discharged on reflex. That's the discipline of action, the discipline of perception, and the discipline of finitude, all collapsed into one habit that takes minutes, not hours, and asks for nothing more than honesty. You don't need a different life. You need to actually be inside the one you already have. Starting with the next 10 minutes, hand back on the wheel instead of letting your foot run the pedal while your mind drives somewhere else entirely. Here's exactly how Marcus would have you start, in 3 pieces. 1 question every night before bed. Which of today's actions were actually mine, decided on purpose, and which ones were just the old reflex running the program? You don't need a journal full of pages. 1 honest sentence, said out loud or written down, is enough. Do it at the same time every night so it becomes automatic in the one place. Automatic is actually useful. 1 warning sign to catch the pattern in real time. The moment you realize you can't remember the last 10 minutes of something, a drive, a scroll, a conversation, that's the autopilot light turning on. Don't punish it. Just notice it, name it silently, that's the autopilot, and let the noticing itself be the win. Noticing is the entire skill, the rest follows from repetition. 1 micro action to break the chain. Before you move from one task to the next today, insert 60 seconds of real silence first. No phone, no scrolling, no transition noise. Just 60 seconds standing or sitting in the gap between one thing and the next. That single pause is the seam Marcus spent his whole life trying to widen. The gap between what happens and what you choose to do about it. Your life isn't behind you. It's just been driving itself for a while you sat in the passenger seat of your own days. All Marcus is asking is that you put your hand back on the wheel, one decision at a time, starting with the next 10 minutes.